Welcome back to the series The Life of Buddha Shakyamuni. In episode 29, we have witnessed a meaningful journey. Buddha continued to preach, teach, and guide his disciples on the path to enlightenment. Each lecture, each dialogue is a precious gem in the treasure of Buddhist wisdom. A significant highlight of this episode is the appearance of Kadudai, a messenger from his native Kapilavatthu. He comes to the bamboo grove to meet the Buddha, bringing news and affection from the royal family. Through Kadai's keen eyes, we are introduced to the beauty of the serenity and order of the monastic community led by the Buddha. Kadai and his entourage heard the Dhamma and attained arahantship and were ordained as monks. The meeting between Kadai and the Buddha was a moving moment where past and present merged. The Buddha expressed his intention to visit his homeland in early spring, showing his deep concern for his family and homeland. Episode 29 ends with Kadudai smiling, realizing that all the world is pure. This is a vivid demonstration of the transformative power of the Buddha's teachings, which can lead people from worldly life to a state of peace and enlightenment. As we enter episode 30, let's wait and see what happens in the Buddha's journey to spread the Dharma. How will the trip back to his homeland unfold? And what valuable lessons will be revealed in the next chapter of this great Buddha's life? The Life of Buddha Shakyamuni, Episode 30, Family Reunion. Buddha meets his father, Queen, and Rahula. After Kadudai returned home to report the news, the Buddha convened the Sangha, selected 500 bhikkhus with the last of their asavas to set out with him, with Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahakassapa to guide the assembly. As for all activities at the bamboo grove, the Buddha entrusted the instruction, the reminders for the monks to practice, and the sermons to the two groups of white-robed laymen to Venerable Moggallana, the group of Venerable Yasa, the three Venerable Kassapas, and other senior disciples. As for Venerable Kondanya, he asked to live in seclusion in the Himalayas. The Buddha and his 500 monks set out on a sunny day, with a cool spring breeze and hundreds of flowers blooming everywhere. The road from Rajagagha to Kapilavatthu had to go northwest, cross the Ganga River at the town of Pataligama, and then follow the merchant route. The entire journey was about 60 yojanas. Because the Buddha had to go on alms round while carrying his alms bowl, and occasionally preaching in villages and towns, the delegation could only travel about 1 yojana each day. Thus, it took nearly 2 months to reach their destination. Venerable Kadudai and more than 10 Sakya monks who had attained arahantship welcomed the Buddha 9 or 10 days before his arrival. Due to the transcendent joy in his heart, due to the happiness of the royal court and the two kingdoms in welcoming the teacher of devas and humans, Venerable Kadudai was inspired to utter a beautiful and splendid hymn of praise with bright and radiant colors. The path where world-honored one goes. The gods play music sweet. The goddesses toss flowers high, where jade and crystal meet. The way the Buddha walks is bright, with trees in shady rows, red roses bloom, and yellow shine, where butterflies repose. The fruits of red and green hang low, in joy to greet the sage. The sky is filled with fragrant air, and peace in every age. O timeless world of endless spring, when Buddha walks this way, the flowers bloom, the teachings fruit, as joy fills night and day. The summer heat, the winter chill are gone, forever past, eternal spring in every step, with peace and truth that last. The Sakyas and Koliyas stand, with blessings rare and true, beside the blue Rohini's flow, where hearts turn green anew. They bow to greet the Venerable One, in reverence and grace, to honor him, the Master kind, in this most sacred place. The Buddha had to stop and smile at the elegant, pure, yet equally splendid and glorious words of his close friend who had just attained enlightenment. And indeed, the Buddha and the group of monks leisurely walked in the space filled with the fragrant scent of the fields and flowers of spring. Arriving at Kapilavatthu, the Buddha told Kadudai not to enter the capital city yet, but to let him and the assembly of bhikkhus stay temporarily at Nigrodharama, Nikolutvian, that is, an ancient banyan forest in the southeast of the capital city, with many large shady trees that were often visited by ascetics and ascetics in the past. King Suddhodana, the royal court, and the descendants of the Sakya clan heard the news and went to Nigrodharama to welcome him. However, the elders of the clan, who were naturally arrogant, thought, even if he is a Buddha or a saint, this monk is only a relative. Therefore, they just stood still or chose a seat somewhere in the back, telling the younger ones to come forward to welcome him. Turning their minds to him, the Buddha understood everything, but he walked towards King Suddhodana. Father, Prince. Handing the alms bowl to the attendant, the monk Nagita, the Buddha tightly held the king's two dry and thin hands. After nearly 8 years of separation, the king, although older, was still sharp and strong. Looking at the tears flowing silently down the king's wrinkled cheeks, the Buddha felt very sympathetic, but he controlled his emotions, sending an extremely gentle and warm look. The king himself felt very clearly that his son was no longer the Prince Siddhartha of the past, but a noble great monk, a great spiritual leader who had risen high, far above the world, no longer limited to the common things of everyday life. Unconsciously, the king bowed his head, respectfully clasping his hands in the style and custom of a king when meeting a true master, a religious teacher, a religious leader. The Buddha was very pleased to see his father's intellectual attitude, and wanting to increase that faith, and at the same time to influence and subdue the arrogance of the royal family, he immediately flew up into the sky, created a jade path stretching from east to west, and walked back and forth. A moment later, the Buddha used an inconceivable supernatural power, creating the Yamaka Patahariya spell, which means 2 parallel supernatural powers, causing water and fire to simultaneously arise from the pores of his skin. Then 2 blue and red rays of light shone forth like 2 flashes of lightning, dazzling the assembly. After displaying his divine power, the Buddha landed on the prepared throne, sitting solemnly and calmly. Seeing the Buddha's miraculous powers, King Suddhodana's whole body grew goosebumps. Faith arose, and once again he confirmed what he had been thinking. Indeed, my son is no longer the crown prince of the dynasty, but is truly the mighty power of a Buddha, a Samyak Sambuddha, as everyone has praised and honored. Thinking this, the king unconsciously knelt down to pay homage and exclaimed, "This is the 3rd time, Father, I pay homage to you." The entire court, the Sakya clan, big and small, were afraid and knelt down to pay homage. Venerable Sariputta was beside the Buddha, and Venerable Moggallana, at that time, was at the Bamboo Grove Monastery, 60 yojanas away, but both of their minds were in harmony, wanting to help the world-honored one easily enlighten the royal family. So at the same time, as if in the blink of an eye, they were like 2 golden clouds, flying up into the sky, at the same time landing on the right and left, prostrating themselves on the ground with their 5 limbs, and then saying to him, "Venerable Master, how should one practice to become a Samyak Sambuddha? How should one spend time practicing the paramitas?" Knowing the intentions of the 2 great disciples, the Buddha then raised his voice in the 8 perfect Sanskrit tones, preaching a dharma talk about the Buddha school, Buddhavamsa, that is, the origin and conduct of the Buddhas. To attain the fruit of right enlightenment, one must go through 7 asamkhyas of vows in the mind, 9 asamkhyas of vows in words, 4 asamkhyas and 100,000 great kalpas of practicing the 13 paramitas through 24 Buddhas. Then the Buddha also briefly but fully recounted the deeds of those 24 Buddhas: Buddha Dipankara, Buddha Kondanya, Buddha Mangala, Buddha Sumana, Buddha Ravada, Buddha Sobhita, Buddha Anumodasi, Buddha Paduma, Buddha Narada, Buddha Padamutara, Buddha Sumedha, Buddha Sujata, Buddha Piyadasi, Buddha Atthadasi, Buddha Dhammadasi, Buddha Siddhartha, Buddha Tissa, Buddha Fusa, Buddha Vipassi, Buddha Sikhi, Buddha Vesabu, Buddha Kakusanda, Buddha Konagamana, Buddha Kassapa. And he himself was the 25th Buddha, whose name was Sakya Gautama. During those countless lifetimes of wandering in birth and death, he himself had 5 lifetimes as a monk, 9 lifetimes as a monk, 5 lifetimes as a layman, 2 lifetimes as a dragon king, 1 lifetime as a Saka, 1 lifetime as a Yaksha commander, 1 lifetime as a lion king, all of whom were prophesied by the Buddhas with their names, hometowns, lineages, and deeds clearly and transparently. Then there were countless lifetimes of confusion, like walking in the fog, going up and down, sinking and floating between the 3 realms and 6 paths, truly incalculable. During the Buddha's Dharma period, how strange, There were many devas who attained the stream entry fruition, but the assembly seemed to have a wonderful horizon opened up, but no one attained anything. At that moment, a sudden rain poured down. A red rain like the color of blood. A strange rain. The Buddha, the holy monks, those who had just begun to have faith were dry, but those who were arrogant and conceited were soaked like drowned rats. Everyone discussed enthusiastically. The Buddha preached another Dharma talk, recounting how in his penultimate life as a human, Prince Vesantara had given alms against his will with the 5 great alms, and after 12 years of exile, he returned to be king. In the midst of his close assembly, there was also a rain like that, but it was a rain of 7 treasures that filled the palace. After his human life, he was born as the celestial Setakatu in the Tusita heaven. At the end of his life, he was reborn into the womb of his mother Mahamaya, his father King Suddhodana, the Sakya clan, the capital Kapilavatthu, to perfect the virtues of a fully enlightened one. Thus, the Buddha had explained the cause and effect of countless eons quite clearly, making the assembly very pleased. But when they parted, no one in the royal family knew what their duty was to invite the Buddha and the Sangha the next day. King Suddhodana alone simply thought, "Now that we have returned to our homeland, we must eat at the palace." So he had a very thoughtful banquet prepared to entertain the Buddha. That night, at Nigrodharama Park, the Buddha received his old friends led by Venerable Kadudai, namely Mahanam, Bhadia, Ananda, Anuruddha, Kimbila, Bhagu, and Nanda and Channa too. Perhaps Venerable Kadudai had told them quite a lot about the Buddha, their old elder brother, who had discovered the true meaning and value of life, who had completely solved the problem of life and death. Furthermore, in the afternoon, among the crowd, they had witnessed the Buddha's miraculous powers, had heard 2 Dharma talks, so they knew clearly that they were now worldly people, and the ideas he preached were no longer in the realm of worldly peace, food and clothing for all people, but something more eternal and more complete. Strangely enough, the Buddha did not give any instructions. He only asked about each person's work, who was married, who was not. The Buddha smiled when he learned that only Mahanama had a wife and children. The others all preferred to live single. During the whole conversation, they were bathed in the atmosphere of loving kindness. Then the Buddha made an appointment for another time, saying that there was not enough time to talk more. In the second half of the 3rd watch of the next day, the Buddha turned his mind to the past, knowing that, according to the custom of the Buddhas, when visiting their relatives, they did not go straight home but followed the alms round practice, so he informed the Venerable Sariputta. Then, with a coral-colored robe over his shoulder, a jet-black stone bowl in his hand, the Buddha, like a golden-haired lion king, led more than 500 holy monks into the city center. They went from one street to another, from one house door to another, without distinction between rich and poor, noble and humble. For the first time, the capital city of Kapilavatthu seemed to be lit up by the group of monks whose news they had heard since the previous evening. The founder of that new religion was the Buddha. It was said to be their beloved, virtuous prince, Siddhartha. Word of mouth, word of ear, in no time, the entire capital seemed to be in a fever. Curious, surprised eyes. Groups of 5 or 7 pointed and discussed. So they all came out to see and respectfully placed bowls for the Buddha and the group of monks. King Suddhodana heard the news from his servants, both angry and sad, and immediately got on his 4-horse chariot and left the palace. When he reached the main road, the king saw the group of monks like a golden dragon winding as far as the eye could see, and the Buddha, with his tall, majestic, and dignified appearance, walking step by step at the head like a phoenix. Suddenly, the king felt a sense of respect. All the anger in his heart suddenly seemed to cool down. Stepping toward the Buddha, the king bowed politely but opened his voice as if resentful, as if reproachful. After all, the crown prince is still considered the king of this country. Can't we and the entire royal family even provide the crown prince with a meal, and instead go begging around like a street urchin? How could the crown prince bear to hurt the royal family like this? To humiliate the royal tradition like this? Buddha stopped and smiled. No, father. Tathagata has never harmed the royal family or disgraced the dynasty. Going to beg for alms at every door is the tradition and lineage of Tathagata. The king softened his voice, but still kept his opinion. The Sakya lineage is a lineage of heroic warriors, and we have never seen anyone in that tradition so humiliatingly begging for alms. Father, the Buddha gently said, tradition, the heroic Sakya lineage does not do that, but this is the tradition of the Buddhas of the three periods. Then he explained, all people in this teaching must go begging for food. When receiving a spoonful of porridge, a ladle of rice from the poor, or a delicacy from the king, the mendicant monks all respected equally. In the clear blue eyes of the monk, all are equal, without distinction between rich and poor, noble and humble. A Brahmin, a Kshatriya, a vassal, a Sutra, or even a Chandala slave are all human beings. All have the same dignity, worth, and value, and everyone has the ability to awaken and be liberated. After a short rest, the Buddha signaled his attendant Nagita to carry his bowl and follow behind, and the Venerable Sariputta went with him. Venerable Mahakassapa and Venerable Kadudai led the group of monks to disperse to the streets to beg for alms, then went to Nigrodharma Park to wait for him, while the Buddha held his father's hand and walked back to the palace, continuing the story as he walked. Father, you see, our society is too unequal in terms of wealth, not equal in terms of rights. Some are too poor and miserable, others are too rich and luxurious. Class discrimination and discrimination have created a deep gap, causing many people to no longer maintain their human values. The Dharma that the Tathagata has enlightened and realized takes people as the center and all are equal. Thus, going to beg for alms through every door, without distinction, is the practice method of all monks from the past to the future. When they go on alms round like that, they are humble and quiet, they are mindful and alert, they are proletarian and poor, they are selfless and without arrogance, they are leisurely and detached. In addition, they also create opportunities for everyone to open their hearts. Everyone can give alms, make offerings, and sow the seeds of affinity with the Dharma. Doing so brings happiness and joy to oneself and to others. Those humanistic and humane values, that wonderful aesthetics, the king should have applied them to the royal court's policies, respecting the dignity of people for equality, for love, for the happiness of all people. Hearing this, the opportunity was ripe. King Suddhodana attained stream entry, felt his mind clear, his intelligence bright, his faith unshakable, all doubts gone. He bowed down, humbly, joyfully invited the Buddha to the palace to eat. The Buddha did not ride in a carriage, but walked, leisurely and leisurely. So the king had to walk too. When they arrived at the palace, thousands of people had gathered like a big festival. The scenery had not changed much, but the flowers were brilliant, and the incense was fragrant everywhere. Everyone was amazed, because the Buddha seemed even more beautiful, luxurious, and somehow more respectable and different than Prince Siddhartha before. The Buddha smiled, looking around as if silently greeting everyone. From afar, Mrs. Gautami, with a radiant smile, still youthful in a blue sari, nimbly and gently walked towards him. The Queen Mother's health is still very good, no different from before. The Buddha spoke warmly, and when he saw her start to sob, he continued with a smile. This reunion should be a happy one. Here Yasodhara, Rahula, Sundari Nanda, and Nanda are also missing. The king invited the Buddha to sit in a prepared seat. In the spacious audience hall, the king and queen themselves served the Buddha with food in his bowl. Venerable Sariputta and his attendant monk Nagita were also treated in the same way. After lunch, Buddha said, "Father is old and needs a solid support for his life. Father can start to practice a righteous life for the happiness of this life and the happiness of many future lives." Miraculously, after the Buddha's reminder, King Suddhodana attained the Sakadagami fruit, and Mrs. Gautami attained the Sotapati fruit. Knowing what was happening in the hearts of his loved ones, the Buddha suddenly stood up, kindly held the king's hand, and walked towards the eastern palace, where Yasodhara lived. As a fully enlightened one, the Buddha knew the feelings of women of Yasodhara, who were easily moved, easily hurt, and pitiful. He himself had to visit Yasodhara, not Yasodhara visiting him. And the Buddha was right. Yasodhara at that time had heard a lot about her husband and was both happy and sad, impatient, eager, nervous, and trembling. She thought to herself, If during the prince's absence for 8 long years I am lacking in virtue, I am lacking in loyalty, then the prince will not come to visit me. If I were a flawless Mani gem, then the prince himself would have to come to visit me even if he were a Buddha. The Buddha suddenly said to Venerable Sariputta, "Women's feelings, you know. So when the Tathagata visits Yasodhara, let the princess express her feelings as she pleases." And indeed, when the Buddha sat on the prepared throne, Yasodhara, wearing a moon-yellow sari, without any jewels or garish flowers from the harem, walked on her knees, came to the Buddha's feet, knelt down, covered her face with his dusty feet, and cried bitterly. The Buddha just let it be. A moment later, knowing that the tears had flowed away, the emotions that had been suppressed for a long time, the Buddha gently said, "Hey Yasodhara, hey Gopa. The Tathagata is still not much different from before. The Tathagata is still the same old person. But now, the Tathagata's mind is purer, the Tathagata's wisdom is brighter. The Tathagata has discovered the eternal value of life that once upon a time we, the princes, together worried about, together struggled with. Now the Tathagata is the embodiment of something that is both inside this life and outside and above this life to save humanity. Therefore, the Tathagata no longer lives for himself, but lives for the happiness and well-being of sentient beings in the 3 realms and 4 species. Hey Gopa, as a wise person, as someone who shares the joys and sorrows with the Tathagata and shares the paramita vows with the Tathagata, Gopa must know this." Hearing these words, Yasodhara's heart was opened and she wiped away her tears. Queen Gautami looked at the princess affectionately and praised her virtues. Since the prince's departure, the princess has been extremely sad, as if she had lost the most precious treasure in the world. However, she has maintained a rare self-control. The princess's greatest consolation is the young Rahula. When she heard that the prince was living the life of a monk, wandering without a door or a home, the princess threw away her jewelry and adornments, wearing only a simple white sari. When she heard that the prince was living an ascetic life, the princess also began to give up perfumes, ointments, high beds, and warm blankets. She only slept on a tree pillow, on the ground, and ate only a small amount of food at noon each day. Many rich, elegant, noble, and well-matched princes, and young men came to ask for her hand in marriage, but the princess refused to receive them all. When she heard that the prince had attained Buddhahood and was wearing a yellow robe, leading a group of pure monks to visit his homeland, the princess also wore a yellow sari. So not only did the princess have perfect virtue, she also knew how to sympathize and share with the prince during each year, each month, each day of separation. "Mother, don't say any more," Yasodhara suddenly said and went to her side. "The prince is now a Buddha. There is nothing that a Buddha does not know. Yes, Gopa, there is nothing that the Tathagata does not know. And the Tathagata knows much more." Then he turned as if talking to the king and queen Gautami. That is how Gopa is, not only now, but also since countless previous lives from the time of the Buddha Dipankara and through the 24 Samyak Sambuddhas. She has always been upright, virtuous, chaste, faithful, sharing joys and sorrows, constantly helping the Tathagata, supporting the Tathagata, encouraging the Tathagata on the path of spiritual practice. Having said this, the Buddha lifted the veil of the past. Approximately 4 Asamkheyas and 100,000 great eons ago, there appeared the Buddha Dipankara. At that time, there was a young man named Sumedha, born into a wealthy Brahmin family with outstanding intelligence, talent, appearance, and learning. After his parents passed away, Sumedha made a great offering and then went to the mountains to live the life of an ascetic. Through diligent practice, the ascetic attained the 8 concentrations and 5 supernatural powers. However, he knew that the problem of afflictions and suffering had not yet been completely solved. The other day in the city of Ramavati, the people were bustling about preparing to welcome the Buddha and the holy monks. They had to work together to build a long road eroded by rain and floods and made muddy. Just hearing the word Buddha, Buddho, Buddho, the mind of the ascetic Sumedha was greatly shaken. He had the intention to contribute to this merit, so he asked to take on the most difficult part of the road. He thought, if I use my supernatural powers, it will be done in a flash. But if I do that, there will be no sweat, no effort, and in the end, it will have no meaning and value. so the ascetic used his own labor. When the Buddha and the holy monks arrived, the long road was smooth, clean, and dry, but the part of the road that he was responsible for was not yet completed. Looking at the muddy road that was only about the size of a shoulder pole, the ascetic Sumedha had made up his mind. However, when the Buddha Dipankara and the holy monks had come near, seeing his auspicious and radiant appearance, the ascetic had a pure heart, wanting to make an offering of something, so he kept looking around. In the crowd of people, the ascetic suddenly saw a beautiful girl holding 8 lotus flowers in her hand. And strangely enough, that girl was also looking intently at him. That girl's name was Sumita. When she saw Sumedha, her heart was deeply moved, and then, as if understanding his wish, she said, "Of these 8 lotus flowers, 3 are my share to offer to the Buddha. The remaining 5 are your share, but with one condition." "Just say it, miss," the ascetic Sumedha said hastily. "Whatever condition I can fulfill." Sumita smiled. "Your appearance and character are truly wonderful. Your merit in completing the path to welcome the Buddha is also truly wonderful. In the future, you will surely achieve your great wish in your path of cultivation. I vow to follow you, to carry your cloth and fix your bag for countless future lives." The young Taoist's heart suddenly trembled, but he said, "I agree to that condition, but you must promise not to hinder my aspirations and paramita practices." The young woman smiled, nodded in agreement, and then gave the monk 5 fresh lotus flowers. Then they both held hands, ran to kneel at the Buddha's feet, and together offered him 8 lotus flowers. As soon as this was done, the monk Sumedha suddenly fell to the ground, hugged his dusty feet, and exclaimed, "There is only one muddy stretch of road left. I vow to use this fake body to pave the way for the world-honored one and the holy assembly to walk on. I vow that with the merits of today, I will attain Buddhahood in the future for the happiness of gods and humans." Having made this vow, the ascetic Sumedha quickly lay face down in the mud. The Buddha suddenly turned his mind, clearly knowing cause and effect. He also clearly heard that the earth was shaking because of the ascetic's supreme vow. The gods and Brahmas in the many layers of heaven were scattering mandala flowers, praising and extolling that supreme virtue. He turned back and said to the assembly, "There are 2 rare events that have just happened in this world. The first is the 8 lotus flowers of the young man and the young woman. With their sincere vows, the 2 will become husband and wife from this life to the next, always warm, faithful, and always encouraging and reminding each other on the path of cultivation. The second rare event is that this monk, with his supreme vow, practiced paramita for 4 asamkhya's and 100,000 great eons, through 24 Buddhas, and will attain the fruit of perfect enlightenment, just as he wished." Then the Buddha turned to the 2 men, "Sumedha, your wish will be fulfilled, and from the next life onwards, Sumita will be your faithful companion, like birds flying together across long rivers and vast oceans, of the same mind, of the same kind, of the same merit, of the same cause, of the same result. And Sumita, I will never hinder my husband's wish." At this point, the Buddha concluded, "Wealth, royalty, status, fame, power, and money are not the conditions to bring happiness to people. Love alone is not enough, but also requires understanding, sympathy, and mutual respect. Sumedha and Sumita have been husband and wife for countless lifetimes, and for countless lifetimes, Sumita has always stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder with his partner to practice the supreme path. Sumita at that time is now Yasodhara, and Sumedha is the Tathagata." Everyone was moved. Yasodhara alone was moved and had tears in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. Queen Gautami gently hugged the princess's shoulder and exclaimed, "That's right, Yasodhara has always been like that, ever since the night the prince left the capital." The princess was so perceptive that she knew everything and secretly supported the prince to leave according to his wishes. Everyone laughed happily. The atmosphere became warm and cool. Buddha suddenly asked, "Where are Nanda, Sundari Nanda, and Rahula? They are nowhere to be seen." "Sundari Nanda has taken Rahula somewhere in the garden," Lady Gautami replied, "and Nanda is with his fiancée every day." When the Buddha and Venerable Sariputta stood up to leave, King Suddhodana invited him and the monks to place alms bowls at the royal palace tomorrow. Dear ladies and gentlemen, you have just listened to the video about the life of Buddha Shakyamuni. adapted from the work A Life, a Sun and Moon by Master Geoy Duck. This video series will be broadcast at 7 p.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the YouTube channel Buddhist Story. We sincerely thank you for watching. To not miss the next episodes, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. If you find the content useful, please share this video with your relatives and friends. All your comments are very valuable to us. Please leave comments below the video so we can discuss and share together. Thank you, and see you again in the next episodes of the video series, The Life of Buddha Shakyamuni.